Chad Hasty Show, News Talk, 95.1 FM and 790 AM KFYO. Joining us right now, GOP political strategist, Matt Mackowiak. Matt, good morning. How are you?
I am doing great. Good morning, Chad. How are you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for joining us today. Congress is back at it today, looking ahead towards tax cuts, right? Tax reform is the big thing that they have to get done. And looking over some of the headlines today, a lot of, I guess, unease maybe is the word around Washington, D.C. when it comes to the Senate actually getting something done on this issue of tax reform?
Yeah, I mean, there's unease because, they don't have the votes yet. And there are a couple senators that have specific concerns. You have, I think, Bob Corker has concerns about the effect on the deficit. Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins, two of the moderate Republicans, have some sort of unique concerns, although I think Lisa Murkowski is basically on board now. But the real question mark is you throw McCain and Jeff Flake, John McCain and Jeff Flake, the two Arizona senators, in there, and we really don't know what they're going to do. And then you add Ron Johnson from Wisconsin. He has said that he thinks that the bill doesn't do enough to help basically pass-through entities, these individuals that kind of like myself maybe that have LLCs or other types of entities that they use for their business, that they're not getting the kind of help that some of the corporations are getting. So I guess the bottom line is there's a range of issues in the bill. They're going to work on those issues through an amendment process early this week. The bill has to get out of the Budget Committee either today or tomorrow. Which will be interesting because I think two of the senators I mentioned are on the Budget Committee, so they'll have to vote in committee on the bill. And then the hope is they pass it Thursday or Friday after a vote-a-rama that could last 2 days or a day and a half, where they vote on amendments every 15 minutes around the clock. So, look, the bottom line, Chad, I know that was a lot of complicated context there, but the bottom line is I think they're close. I think the momentum is with the bill because I think they know they have to do this. Tax reform is a unifying principle for Republicans. The failure on health care made tax reform all the more urgent. And honestly, I think that for a lot of these senators, if they think things are bad now, if they fail to pass tax reform, if they take a vote and it fails this week in the Senate, I really don't know where things are headed. I mean, I think that things could get 1,000 times worse than they are now. And there's a lot of frustration on Capitol Hill with how little's been accomplished to date.
Well, and let's say they do pass something. And I know Senator Rand Paul, you tweeted out a link earlier where he's come out with an opinion piece saying it's not perfect, but it's time to step up and do something. Let's say something does get passed out of the Senate. At that point, I know the House and Senate, they're going to get together and come up with a final bill.
Yeah.
Do we even think that the tax reform bill that we see right now is going to be close to what we see as a final product?
So the House and the Senate, have some similarities, but they have some specific differences for sure. And so that is going to be a question, can a conferenced bill get through both houses? I have to wonder whether a senator is going to vote for the initial bill and then vote against the conference bill. I just think that from a message standpoint, that's really difficult to explain to the voters, particularly when I think the tax reform bill is going to be very popular among Republican voters. May not necessarily have at this point yet be popular with the broader public. Ultimately, all that's going to matter is whether the bill, raises wages and grows the economy and creates private sector job growth, et cetera. So. But look, that is another question mark, certainly, particularly when the margin is so close. And I would add one other factor to keep in mind. You have a special election in Alabama on December 12th. If Doug Jones, the Democrat, ends up defeating Roy Moore, the Republican, you could have a situation where the 2-vote Republican majority in the Senate gets cut in half. And so depending on when that bill is conferenced and when it comes back, there's a chance that they could only lose 1 vote, not 2, to pass the conference bill through the Senate, if that makes sense. So I actually think one thing to watch is the House may just take up and pass the Senate bill and not even go to conference. They don't want to do that, but if the Alabama race goes the wrong way, or if they decide that is the path of least resistance, that may be a direction they go. I think that's one thing to watch.
You've probably seen the headlines out, the generic Democrat beating the generic Republican, and Republicans worrying about that. I get the feeling that it's almost too soon. If they pass tax reform, it could be, we could see Republican voters, at least get excited again about some momentum. Right now, if you're a Republican and you're going to be in a close race, who are you running away from? Are you running away from Trump, or are you running away from Mitch McConnell, or even Paul Ryan? Who are you running away from right now?
Yeah, I mean, the generic ballot is a concern. Look, you're not running in generic races. You're running with one particular Republican candidate and one particular Democratic candidate. So every race is unique. Every incumbent is unique. All these situations are different, right? But your question is a good one. It's just, I think it requires a little bit more specificity, in the sense that if you're talking about a primary election, Trump is very popular with Republican primary voters. He's at 80% support among Republicans around the country. McConnell and Ryan are not popular among Republican primary voters for a lot of reasons. McConnell, because the Senate has been very ineffective this year, with the exception of judges. And Ryan is unpopular. I'm not even sure I understand why, because the House has been pretty successful this year, actually, moving a lot of legislation. But he's, seen as the establishment, and being part of the establishment is not where you want to be right now. Now, as it relates to the general election, which I think is what you were more focused on, it depends on the district. And you're right. If they pass tax reform and if it succeeds and people start to feel better, I think they're going to start seeing people with more money in their pockets beginning the first quarter of next year, even in January, because you're going to have less withheld if they pass the bill before the end of the year, which is why there's such urgency. I do think things can come back to normal. But yes, I mean, the fact that the generic ballot is the worst it's ever been for Republicans is bad. I mean, I worked in a brutal election cycle in 2006 for Republicans, and I can tell you, when you are up against a wave, there is nothing you can do. Now, it is too early to say for sure this is a wave, but right now, all the early indicators are bad for Republicans, and that's part of why they have got to get some major wins on the board that make people's lives better, that unify Republicans, and that give them a chance to go win independent votes in these districts and these states across the country next year in the midterms. This is big time looking into the crystal ball, but looking ahead to 2020, it looks like Bernie's already making steps to run. You've got Joe Biden, who I think will probably run if his health holds up over the next couple of years. So you've got two of the leading Democrats, Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden. In the Democratic Party, they love talking about how, hey, we're the young party, we're the diverse party, and it's Joe Biden and Bernie once again who may be the leaders of the party. Is that going to fire up the Democratic base when possibly running against Donald Trump? And we know that Trump's base is still active, and they're still happy, and they still want Trump to win. Yeah, it's a big question, obviously. And look, the next 2 years, right, the 2019 and 2020 legislative years will depend to a great extent on whether the Democrats take the House back, okay? Because the whole world changes if they take the House back.
Right.
If they don't, then Trump and the Republicans still have a chance to get more done and to enact more of Trump's agenda, give him a better chance to get reelected. But you're right, the Democrats are a bit of a mess right now, and it's not getting quite as much attention because of some of the problems the Trump White House is having and some of the other major issues that we're seeing across the country and across the world. But the Democratic field for president is wide open. They're going to have a massive field. It's going to be very divisive. The Sanders-Warren wing of the Democratic Party is resurgent right now, but it's not clear that wing can be successful. And so the candidate that worries me most as a Republican not wanting to see a Democratic elected president is Joe Biden. And people can maybe laugh about that if they want, but he has an ability, I think, if he runs, and if he's disciplined, which is a big if, to go into those areas that Trump was able to win in 2016 in Pennsylvania, in Ohio, in Wisconsin, in Iowa, those blue-collar towns and areas. He has an opportunity to make an argument to that kind of voter and connect with them in a way that Hillary certainly didn't, and some of the other candidates may not be able to. So, but there is no really strong, overwhelming front-runner candidate on the Democratic side, and they're going to have a pretty nasty, unwieldy, very highly competitive Democratic primary for president in 2020 based on what we know right now.
Before I let you go, what's next for Republicans after tax reform, and what's next for the president? What do you think?
Yeah. So there's actually some really key deadlines for the end of the year. And they're really are already behind. And these things may not be sexy, but there's a key provision related to surveillance that the National Security Agency uses. I think it's called Section 170, if I remember correctly, that expires. They have that. They have the so-called Dreamers. The DACA program expires March 5th. So you may see that get rolled into the spending bill at the end of the year. They have to keep government going. I forget the exact deadline, but it's the first or second week of December that the government will shut down if they don't pass a continuing resolution or an overall spending bill for next year. And then the White House still, it's amazing, they still, as much as they've talked about infrastructure, they've not put out an infrastructure plan. I do think they were waiting to get tax reform behind them, but that is going to be a major push, late this year, early next year, perhaps first quarter of next year, try to pass an infrastructure bill. So there's a lot still that they're trying to do, and obviously there's very limited time the rest of the year.
Yep. Matt, tell folks where they can subscribe to your newsletter and what you have coming up on your podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate that. So I had Democratic pollster Doug Schoen, who's a Fox News analyst, on the most recent podcast episode. We talk about a lot of these issues. Podcast is called Mac on Politics. You can find it in iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, etc. The newsletter, which I know you rely on, called Must Read Texas, is a morning newsletter that we send around. It's about statewide news and politics and business. You can sign up at MRT, that's M as in Mary, RTsignup.com.
All right, Matt, as always, appreciate your time, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thanks a lot, Chad. Take care.
Have a good one. That's Matt Mackowiak